Welcome to the Leadership for Society's talk series. This series is People and Planet in the Information Era. And today I'm joined by Congressman Ken Buck. Congressman Buck is in his fifth term representing the 4th District of Colorado and is a member of the Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial, and Administrative Law. Thanks for joining us, Congressman Buck.
Thank you, Brian.
So let's start off by asking you to explain what the Subcommittee on Antitrust does.
Well, we are really formed, and the primary reason is to look at mergers and acquisitions in this country, and also to make sure that we're updating the Sherman Act and Clayton Act, the major antitrust laws that have been enacted in the past. Frankly, it's kind of hard not to update them because the Sherman Act was passed in the 1800s and the Clayton Act in 1913, and so there's a lot of updating to do, but we are focused on competition policy in the United States.
And in particular, in the recent Congresses, what have you been most focused on in the subcommittee?
Well, we've been most focused on big tech. We have certainly looked at other areas. We examined the merger between Sprint and T-Mobile. We looked at some other mergers that were of interest, but for the most part, we've done an 18-month investigation of big tech, as well as markups on bills concerning big tech.
I see. And have you pushed for particular regulations personally? Have there been ones that have been particularly important to you?
Well, the laws that we have passed, all of them are important to me because they promote competition in the big tech area. And the big tech area is particularly important because these technology companies are monopolies and they control the flow of information in this country. And so to make sure we are not discriminating against any particular voice in this country, it's important to have a broad group of information disseminators out there.
I see. And some people would suggest, though, that these big companies, the big tech companies, actually might produce positives. So some experts out of Wharton warned that breaking up these three companies, and the three being Amazon, Google, and Facebook, could result in unintended consequences that would ultimately hurt consumers. They say that they have lowered prices of products and services to consumers by providing a marketing platform for small companies at little to no cost. What do you say in response to those kinds of thoughts?
Well, first of all, when you talk about little or no cost, one of the primary focus points of the consumer welfare standard was cost to consumers. And so we now have both e-commerce and social media and search engines. And let's just talk about search engines for a moment. There is no cost when you go on and Google something. But Google makes a ton of money by selling your search history to advertisers, as well as other pieces of information that they accumulate. So they also they know where you are, they know what you've searched for, they know your medical history, they know all sorts of things about every individual in this country, and they sell that information. Now, one group of people would say that there's no cost for searching on Google. Another group of people would say there is a benefit that Google receives that they don't pay for. So in a true marketplace, we would have competition between search engines, and those search engines would be paying consumers or paying users to use their product, and then they could sell the advertising for the profits that they make. That there is a lost benefit in terms of cost to consumers.
I see. I mean, I'm interested in the selling of data. It seems like it creates a little bit of concern that that's how they're funding the enterprise. So you'd want to curtail or create regulations about the selling of data?
Well, I think that's a good area to look at. I think every time someone goes on and searches, they should have a choice whether the search engine is allowed to record that information, that data, or not. Right now, we have a user agreement that's 32 pages long, and on page 23, lines 6 and 7 say, I give up all rights to object to the use of this data or privacy in this data. So that's one issue. But the bigger issue really is making sure we have competition in that area. And by the way, I've never said anything about breaking these companies up, and that's not my perspective. My perspective is to try to really help the marketplace in determining and giving consumers choice.
Oh, I'm curious about that. So how would you do that? You don't break them up. They have an incredible power. How would you limit that monopolistic power that you described without breaking them up?
You know, the devil is in the details, and we've written a lot on this subject matter, and I would encourage people to go to the reports written by the Antitrust Subcommittee. But I'll give you one example. Gmail obviously is a dominant player in the email market, and there is a encrypted email company called Proton Mail. And what Gmail did was when any Proton Mail user sent an email to Gmail, it was immediately sent to the spam folder. And at some point in time, Proton Mail users are going to get frustrated that people aren't getting their emails and stop using Proton Mail. So it was a way of discriminating against a competitor. One of the bills that we've got is called the non-discrimination bill. And it just says you can't discriminate against competitors in this marketplace in that way. Amazon is famous for a product selling well on Amazon. Amazon goes and replicates the product, and then Amazon's product is put number one on the search, and the competitor's product is somewhere on page 3 on the search. And so you can't discriminate because you've created a similar product. So the non-discrimination bill just basically requires fairness in the marketplace so that these competitors can compete and give consumers choice. Not much different than breaking a company up.
I see. You know, one thing that's striking to me about this area is that it makes for unusual allies. So you're a Republican, you're conservative, but you work with Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse on some of these reforms. What do you think about this space makes for such unusual allies or atypical allies?
Well, I think that there are a number of areas that I work with Democrats who are not just left of center, but far left of center. Some people would say that I'm far right of center. And, on war powers issues, for example, I work with Ro Khanna and others to try to make sure that before the United States sends troops overseas and engages in a military conflict, that the president comes to Congress as the Constitution requires. I look at it from a constitutional law perspective, and my colleagues on the left look at it from really an anti-war perspective. But regardless, we find common ground. And this is another area, you're absolutely right. This is another area where for maybe different reasons, slightly different reasons, some of the same reasons, we have this concern. I have concern over censorship and speech in the marketplace of ideas. My friends have concern over, my friends on the left have concerns over corporate power and the exertion of corporate power in the marketplace. And we come together and introduce bills and work on bills in this antitrust area.
I see. You know, it's also interesting to me because this creates tensions in terms of the way people typically engage with government and private industry. So I wonder, for example, as a Republican who I assume is free market, how do you think about your role as in the government intervening into the affairs of private industry?
Yeah, so if there was a free market, I would absolutely be opposed to regulation in this area. What I learned through the investigation and through listening to the competitors of Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google is that there isn't a free market. These are monopolies, and their monopolistic behavior is preventing any type of entry into the marketplace. And so that's the real concern is how do we create competition so that there is a market and the market can take over.
I see. And then I'm going to also, I think this is related. You mentioned this in passing, free speech. So I think one of the reasons you focus in this area is because these companies affect the ability for people to broadcast what their ideas. How do you think about moderation of that speech? So I assume that you wouldn't say anything goes. So how do you think about the other side of that, moderation of speech?
Yeah, we have 200 years of case law in this country on moderation of speech. Newspapers can't put out defamatory speech. They can't publish speech that creates a present danger. The same with TV, the same with radio. And big tech should be held to the same standards. We don't want child pornography on the internet. We don't want recruiting terrorists. We don't want drug dealing. There are a lot of things we don't want on the internet, but they're already regulated in other areas. And those regulations, those laws, mostly case law, should apply to big tech. Create more. And what we did with Section 230, where we gave these companies immunity for content that is, quote unquote, otherwise objectionable, is just too broad. And so Section 230 needs to be amended a little bit different than the competition issue, because I believe the New York Times and the Washington Post may disagree with the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, but that's fine. Let them have their own views on vaccines, on masks, on all sorts of issues, and let the American public digest that information and make good decisions. We shouldn't have people deciding, especially government people, interfering with what's going on the internet, making decisions about what is safe for Americans to see.
Yeah, and I'm curious how you think about, again, going back to companies, and presumably they like monopolistic power to the extent that they seek that out because it allows them to generate greater profits, more revenue, et cetera. Why would they be in the business of censoring anyone, right? Why aren't they just in the business of making money? How do you square that?
I don't square it, frankly. I think if you look at what has been revealed recently with Twitter, it's clear that political ideology has entered into the business marketplace and impacted what was going on. Parler is a perfect example of a case where conservative speech, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that liberal progressive speech hasn't been impacted also. I see it more on the conservative side, and so I wrote about it on the conservative side and talk about it. But Parler was used by some people during the January 6th riot in the U.S. Capitol. And it was the next day taken off of the App Store by Apple. And the day after that, I believe it was Amazon Web Services stopped providing services and basically shut down Parler. Facebook was used during the Capitol riots also. Twitter was used during the Capitol riots also. They weren't taken down. Because in my view, they weren't identified as a conservative forum. And so I think that kind of discrimination is dangerous. And it's going to happen to the left. There is going to be plenty of instances where some company is going to figure out the Republicans are in control of the White House and the Senate and the House. And so we're going to play with the Republicans now. And it's going to happen over on the left. And it's dangerous for our country to allow it in any circumstance.
So I'm happy you brought up the January 6th uprising or insurrection, and however you want to describe it, depending on your.
I call it a riot, just to be
riot. Fair. Okay, that's fine. Riot. Should Parler have been taken down because it was being used in that way?
No, it shouldn't have been taken down. I think there was a fair argument that it allowed some content that was dangerous. I think it should have been given time to remediate that situation. But I also think that Twitter was in the same boat. And I think that if Apple was responsible, it would have said, we're going to hit the pause button for 2 weeks, give everybody a chance to do something. Apple actually let Parler back on a month or two later. Amazon Web Services did not.
I see. And when you talked about clear and present danger, I assume that's the place that people are, where there's disagreement about what represents clear and present danger. How would you, in terms of a limit on free speech, how would you define clear and present danger?
Well, we have a case, I think it was Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who wrote, you can't walk into a crowded theater and yell fire. And so there are, I'm sure, thousands of examples now over the years where people have identified clear and present danger. You can't stand on a soapbox in the middle of a city square and demand that people overthrow the government or storm a police building or cause damage to a particular ethnic minority or religious minority or majority for that matter. And so that kind of speech that causes violence, not violence, some point in the future, but there is a present danger of violence, that type of speech should be banned.
I see. And the company should be responsible for managing that, for moderating that?
Well, the companies are now responsible for that. And they should be responsible for making sure, well, they have immunity if something goes up that's bad, and if they take something down that's bad. But they do now moderate that type of speech, but they go beyond that also.
I see. And I want to go back for just a second to the subcommittee that you're on. You were chair previously, and now you're still on the subcommittee, but you were never chair of the subcommittee?
No, we were in the minority, so I was the ranking
Oh,
Republican.
sorry. Yes. Thank you for the correction. I'm wondering, how do you think about how you think it will shift as new leadership comes in? Do you think there'll be a shift in how the subcommittee operates or what they'll focus on?
Great question. I'm just happy we got a speaker after 15 votes. So I really don't know who's going to be in charge of the subcommittee. I don't know what the agenda is going to be for the subcommittee, but I do think that this legislation and this that needs to be addressed.
Great. And one last question for you. What are your hopes for the future and what are your fears?
You're talking about generally. I can include my grandchildren and things like that in there.
I would focus on that. Focus on how we're using information in the current era, like big tech. It could be other legacy media. Just how do you think about what are you excited about or hopeful about in terms of the future as we continue to live in this era where there's so much data available? And what are your fears?
Yeah, so I was going to go in a different direction. My 6-year-old grandson has been put on the terrorist watch list based on his destruction of furniture and everything else. But I think you want to go with big tech, and I'll stay with big tech. And you mentioned something earlier that's absolutely valid. These companies are great. Having next day service and having the ability to search the internet. And all these companies offer something that is awesome. The challenge is to make sure that we are continuing to innovate across the spectrum, artificial intelligence and all the other areas. And that's what concerns me the most is how do we make sure that these companies don't stifle innovation? And how do we make sure that these companies don't stifle speech? And so that's my concern. I don't want to ever punish success, and these companies are successful. We saw this when we moved, in the Industrial Revolution. We saw the Rockefellers and others form monopolies and trusts, and they were able to dominate a particular area of the market. We now see the same thing as we have moved into e-commerce and social media and search engines and other products associated with the internet. We see a small group of people that were ahead of the game and dominate their particular space. And I'm all in favor of people being successful. But if we're going to continue to innovate, if we're going to continue to grow as a country, we need to make sure we have this competition in this marketplace.
Well, I appreciate your time, Congressman Buck. It was great to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Brian. Thank you.